He's so cute. I wonder if he likes me.
She's so fine.
I wish he would kiss me already. He's such a good kisser. Wait, what's he doing?
Oh yeah.
Hold up. This is going too fast.
What, is she playing hard to get?
I'm not ready for this.
All right. You want to get something to eat?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Colonel Cliff James, and for those of you that don't know me, I am the 117th ARW Commander. Today I want to address a very important topic that has been in the headlines. If you've looked at a news source, you know that military sexual assault is a problem. It has gotten attention from all ranks of the military and public. Offenders continue to impact our Air Force, our airmen, and public opinion, and it cannot be tolerated. Today we will focus on identifying offenders, how they groom, think, and operate. You may lean towards questioning or focusing on the victim. Why did they make the choices they did and that allowed them to be vulnerable to an assault? Hindsight is always 20/20, and it allows us to see possibilities clearer in most situations, though we always focus on the needs of the victim by making sure they receive any support and services they may want. Today I need you to put the offender under the microscope and understand how they operate in our environment. By knowing how they maneuver, we have a greater chance of stopping an assault before it happens, which is prevention. And through prevention, we have a better chance of protecting all our airmen. The message for zero tolerance in regards to sexual assault has been delivered from all levels of leadership in our military. To quote our Secretary of Defense, Honorable Chuck Hagel, sexual harassment and sexual assault in the military are a profound betrayal of sacred oaths and sacred trusts. This scourge must be stamped out. We are all accountable and responsible for ensuring that this happens. We cannot fail America, we cannot fail each other, and we cannot fail the men and women that we lead. Our Air Force Chief of Staff, General Welch, says, "Sexual assault undermines the mission effectiveness of our great force. Nothing saddens me more than to know this cancer exists in our ranks." I want you to take a look at this slide. Every one printed figure represents 10 airmen who were victims of sexual assault in 2012. This data was taken from the 2012 DoD Workplace and Gender Relations Survey of active duty members, which will be referred to as WGRA. This slide represents the number of airmen who actually reported his or her assault to the SARC or OSI. Of the 3,259 airmen who were sexually assaulted, only 790 airmen reported it. This is a rate of only 24%. The reason the remaining 76% did not report vary. The biggest reason is the fear of not being believed. Research suggests that false reports are in fact rare. Actually, as few as 2 to 8% of reports are false. The important thing I want you to notice is the gray figures. These figures represent our airmen who live and work among us and who may really need help but do not come forward. Please understand that as your commander, I want to personally encourage anyone who is in need of support to come forward. We will support you. You will be treated with dignity and respect, and we will investigate your case fairly. Let's take a look at the slide again. As you look at the gray figures, I want you to realize that survivors of sexual assault are around you every day. The things you do and say affect them, either in positive ways or negative ways. Over the next several weeks, you will be taking part in small group discussion. You will have an opportunity to examine how each of our behaviors influences those around us. This slide represents the 449 unrestricted reports or reports that were investigated in 2012. That means that 449 victims of sexual assault not only got help, but it also means that they were able to identify a possible offender. It truly takes courage to come forward and report a sexual assault. Each report allows us a chance to stop an offender. Those who report are not to blame for causing the problem or putting a spotlight on the issue. It is the offenders who cause the harm. They are detrimental to our Air Force. The 3,000 victims trying to work and deal with the trauma affects our mission, our family, and our airmen. In order to encourage victims to come forward, we need to understand how offenders operate, as this influences our ability to recognize when our biases interfere with a fair assessment of victims' cases. This crime occurs amongst all ranks. Offenders move among us. This is probably difficult to accept as most of us are doing good things and we may not believe that a fellow airman would harm another member of our Air Force family. Offenders count on us doubting the numbers, the victim's accounts, and the offender's intent. When we resist the facts, victims will not report and offenders will continue to operate in our force. This slide shows the data for the 2013 reports of sexual assault in the Air Force. In 1 year, there has been a 32.5% increase in the number of sexual assaults reported. In other words, 1,047 airmen reported a sexual assault in 2013 compared to the 790 who reported in 2012. This doesn't necessarily mean things are worse. It can also mean that we are getting more victims to come forward and report. Recently, significant improvements have been made to our reporting and response system. For example, a victim may choose to have a special victims counsel. This counsel allows the victim to know his or her legal rights by providing legal representation. The Air Force is the leader in the program, and according to victim surveys, the program has been successful. As I mentioned earlier, most all of us are doing good things and may not believe that a fellow airman would harm another member of our Air Force family. However, I want to discuss important information about offenders and environmental factors that contribute to their legal behavior. I know this slide is busy, but take a look at the rainbow-colored picture on your left. This is the period before an assault occurs, which is a time for prevention. It is a time where we should discourage an environment that allows an offender to operate and identify behaviors that can lead to an assault. The picture on your right, or the grayscale, is after the assault has occurred and is our response. I want to first talk a little bit about the characteristics of perpetrators. It isn't physical characteristics that we need to look for because offenders usually look like any other airman. It is a pattern of behaviors that should trigger concern and intervention. It is fact that most offenders are male. Not only are most offenders male, but it is a fact that most offenders are heterosexual males and that sexual assault has nothing to do with sexual orientation. The data from 2013 shows that 95% of military offenders are male, 1% are female, and 4% are females working with males, according to the WGRA. Additionally, we often think of sexual assault as a female issue. It is not. In the DoD, overall, men accounted for 53% of the total number of victims. Here are some of the characteristics and indicators of offenders. Please note that it does not mean that people who have some of these characteristics will offend. These are just characteristics, according to research, that are commonly found in people who do offend. Also, according to research, there is a certain behavior progression and grooming method offenders follow. Offenders look for environments that allow them to hide and go unchallenged. The non-stranger offender planning sequence contains many environmental cues that allow perpetrators to advance their criminal behaviors. Offenders find it conducive to their behavior when an environment condones or encourages inappropriate behaviors like harassment, gender-focused jokes aimed at both males and females, vulgar pictures or comments, and so on. That kind of environment helps them hide in plain sight. Each step on the continuum of behaviors allows for an easy slide into the next behavior with little question. If an environment is clear of these inappropriate behaviors, comments, and jokes, the actions of an offender stand out as extreme. I also want to take a moment and touch on something that is unique to our situation as a guard unit. I am positive that if I took 25 random airmen and put them in a room together, there would be a couple of family members, a couple of civilian co-workers, a couple of people from the same high school, a couple of parents whose kids play ball together, and a couple of chiefs or colonels who were at the birth of an A1C standing next to them. If you spend any time here, you know that most of the part of this wing is truly a family. However, in that group of 25, there is also going to be a handful of people who don't know each other at all. It may be that one person that you don't know who is an offender, or even worse, a victim. Our behavior and environment will allow one of two things: discourage perpetrators and encourage victims to get help, or encourage perpetrators to continue offending and discourage victims from seeking help. When you are about to make that off-color joke or cut up with your longtime buddy, keep in mind that the person sitting in the seat next to you could either be a perpetrator looking for clues that they are in an environment where they can get away with their behavior, or it may be a victim struggling with a decision to get help and doesn't know if the people around them will support them in that decision. I also want to make you aware that there is a direct relationship between sexual harassment and sexual assault. This is where each of us can make a difference. Most of us will not be present during a sexual assault, but addressing inappropriate behaviors, comments, gestures, sexism, and rape jokes when they occur can have a direct relation to sexual assault. It sends a message to offenders that we are watching and will address those who counter our culture, dignity, and respect. Notice the two graphs on top. The one on the left shows the numbers of sexual assaults, and the one on the right shows the incidence of sexual harassment. The numbers are unacceptable, but I want you to notice the similarities in these two graphs. This is not a coincidence. There is a relationship between sexual harassment and sexual assault. When individuals, particularly leaders, allow sexual harassment to exist in their environment, there is an increase in risk for sexual assault for a woman in that environment. The graph on the bottom, produced from the WGRA, supports this idea as well. We know that those who are assaulted and experienced harassment both before and or after are 55% for females and 38% for males. Types of harassment include crude offensive behavior references, offensive or embarrassing verbal and nonverbal behaviors of a sexual in nature, unwanted sexual attention, references or unwanted attempts to establish a sexual relationship, sexual coercion references, instances of special treatment or favoritism conditioned on sexual cooperation. Take a look at some of the examples of inappropriate items found in our Air Force environment. The sticker in the urinal was in a squadron's male restroom. The pictures on the top and bottom on the right are from a military member's Facebook page, both ridiculing rape and sexual violence. Some may argue that this is being too sensitive, and these are just in fun. But as we saw in the slide, before there is a direct correlation between this type of behavior and sexual assault. Now take a look at the words on the bottom of this slide. Do the pictures on the slide really support our values of integrity, service, and excellence? Like in this slide, where smoke makes it harder to see clearly, these items in our environment blur reality, allow offenders to hide, and desensitize us. We become desensitized to such derogatory behaviors when they are a regular part of our environment, so we don't notice as things escalate. We are less likely to address issues when they arise if their existence is the norm, and offenders can hide in the shadows. It is not a matter of "it's just a joke" or "it's done on my own time." Air Force core values extend to all that we do as airmen. It's about dignity and respect for all. It's about who we are as individuals and what we stand for as a force. During the time represented by the left side of this slide, there are many opportunities for intervention. The majority of us who don't support this kind of negative environment must take the next step and address these behaviors. We know about something on this continuum and do not address it. We are sending a message that we endorse this behavior. We must address these behaviors at the lowest level and not support it with silence. Those who participate in these behaviors must be deterred. They may or may not sexually assault someone, but their behaviors impact the climate and culture of the Air Force. Those who do not participate in the behaviors on the left side of the continuum must not be discouraged, but must be invited to help change the climate and culture of the Air Force. Perpetrators look for targets, someone they see as easy to influence or who won't be believed. They exploit opportunities and vulnerabilities and use every weapon at their disposal, including alcohol, coercion, threats, blackmail, bribery, etc. Offenders might choose a person who is struggling in his or her life or who has some behavior or reputation problems because it makes it more likely that they will succeed with such people and the public will scrutinize the victim and not the offender. I need to take a moment and really emphasize that the most common weapon used by perpetrators is alcohol. It is deliberately chosen by coercive individuals in order to maximize their potential to assault. Non-hostile environments like promotion parties, retirement parties, TDYs, etc. are all opportunities for perpetrators to take advantage of our airmen. I say that not to discourage you from those celebrations and morale opportunities, but to be aware that if our day-to-day culture allows for perpetrators to hide and not be identified, then we are making it easier for that perpetrator to take advantage of those opportunities and victimize our airmen. Repeat offenders are not uncommon. If one of our airmen is sexually assaulted, there is a high probability that offender will do it again. A study by Lissick and Miller found that 120 men freely admitted to acts that met the legal definition of rape. None were reported and thus never prosecuted. The serial offenders averaged 6 victims each. The 120 rapists the researchers interviewed were responsible for 1,225 separate acts of interpersonal violence, including rape, battery, and child physical and sexual abuse. A similar study conducted with a Navy population found 136 offenders admitted to acts that met the definition of rape. None were reported, and thus none never prosecuted. The serial offenders averaged 8 rapes per rapist. Roughly 12% of the male naval recruits admitted to sexual assault, a higher proportion than many studies show in the general public. I want to be clear, a victim of sexual assault is never responsible when a crime has been committed against them. The perpetrators harm our airmen, affect mission readiness, and degrade the dignity and respect we expect as members of the Air Force. It will not be tolerated. Violence must be thought of as a process where the early subtle events are as telling as the dramatic events. Similarly, when predicting violence, there are pre-incident indicators. We know these, we can address them before they become criminal acts that are detrimental to our airmen. Just as we do checks on file plans, equipment, SOPs, etc., we must do the same with our environment before criminals take advantage of the situation and our airmen. The center of this slide is about criminal behavior. Ultimately, criminal behavior occurs because a person, the offender, decided to commit a crime. Sexual assault includes acts of rape, sodomy, forced oral sex, and unwanted touching for sexual gratification. The attempt to do any of these acts falls within the definition of sexual assault. We are going to watch a video that is an excerpt taken from an article written by a rapist. The rapist wrote anonymously to the Manhattan Spirit, a newspaper in New York. The actor is an airman who volunteered to reenact the confession. Besides the fact that he admits to raping a woman, notice the terms that prove that this was intentional and non-consensual. It is a good example of how they manipulate by isolating victims, justifying their behaviors, and even place blame on victims. It is also a good example of how a normal social situation, meeting people at a bar, drinking and socializing, allows offenders to hide in plain sight and continue their criminal behaviors. This is an example of how offenders think.
I raped a woman. I don't believe that I'm a pathological sex offender, but at the same time, I raped. I met her at the bar. She was from England and had come to New York for a short time to tour with a musical review or something. When I walked in, I knew I wanted this girl. I wanted to have sex that night, and she looked like an inviting prospect. It was clear she'd been drinking before I arrived, and we had 3 or 4 drinks together. Our thighs rubbed together, my arm brushed against her breast. I was getting to her. We drank some more, and I grew confident that I was not going home alone that night. She was staying at a friend's place downtown, and I assumed that when we left together, it meant she was going over to my place. Once I had her out of the bar, she had no friends to help her, no one to call, nowhere to go except where I wanted her to go. We started walking, and she asked, "Where are we going?" I said, "Just walking." Knowing that we were headed in the direction of my apartment, we would stop sporadically and make out. During one heavy session, I said to her, "Come back to my place." She refused. I said, "What do you mean, no? This is New York City. You don't leave a bar with a guy and not sleep with him. Come on, this isn't England. This is a big city. This is how we do things." She still refused, but I could tell it was influencing her with that ridiculous line. We got up to my apartment and I began kissing her, but now she was not responding like she did on the street. I asked her, "What's the matter?" She just stared blankly past me. I began to touch her more aggressively, squeezing her breasts, rubbing the inside of her thighs. Still no reaction. I felt like I was fondling a rag doll. Not that I cared, I didn't need any response to get what I wanted. I tried to take her top off, and she locked her arms to her sides. I pulled and forced her arms until I got it off. I eased her down on the bed. She did not resist me, but moved like dead weight, staring straight ahead and grinding her teeth furiously. Ugh. What a repulsive sound, I said. Not a word was spoken during the struggle. Just me trying to get her legs apart and her trying to get them back together. It was primal. Sex lasted about a minute or 2, and when it was over, I had the familiar aftertaste left by unsatisfying sex. My coercive power, which had been so relentless 5 minutes before, was spent. The manipulative force I had used left me empty. I didn't want this girl sleeping in my bed. I also didn't want to walk her home. She sat up in bed. She wanted to leave. But now it was 4 in the morning and I couldn't let her go alone, even if she did know how to get back. Just sleep over, I said reluctantly. You can leave when it's light out. She did sleep over. Didn't stop grinding her teeth the entire night. When we got up the next morning, I insisted she wait and walk out with me. The last thing I said to her when we hit the streets was, you have to walk that way to get back to your friend's house. I raped a woman.
If we were to assign a motto to Jack or to many men like him, it would sound something like this. I'm going to have sex tonight. If it's consensual, that's fine, but I'm going to have sex tonight. What we heard Jack describe was a well thought out, well calculated, and manipulative plan for how he was going to accomplish his goal. Whether she consented, which he tells us he knew that she did not, didn't matter to him. You can tell from his story that what she said, what she did, and what she wanted didn't matter. He was going to take sex from her. Consider if we had only heard her side of the story. What if she told us that she met him at a bar, drank with him, walked to his apartment with him, had some consensual sexual contact with him, and even spent the night with him? It's very unlikely that we would be seeing a successful rape charge to come from those facts, even though he tells us that all of those things were true, and he raped her in spite of them. It's important for us to know that this is not about drunk sex, and there's no such thing as accidental rape. Offenders such as this one premeditate their crimes, and they choose their victims intentionally. They also use alcohol to very intentionally help disarm their victims, and they ignore the signals of non-consent. You also heard Jack describe how the victim acted once she realized what Jack was about to do to her. She was non-responsive when he tried to kiss her. He described how she just stared past him and didn't respond as he squeezed her breasts and rubbed the inside of her thigh. She tried to keep him from pulling her blouse off, but he ignored her. During the rape, she ground her teeth together, stared blankly past him, and did not respond or participate. What Jack describes here is a common response to trauma, a frozen fright response. Jack told us how terrifying it must have been for this young woman from a different country to be forced into a sexual act by someone she had just met. Jack said that for all she knew, she could have just as easily been killed by him. You might find yourself saying, if that was me, I would never have done that, or I would have done this. We respond like this in part because none of us wants to believe that this could ever happen to us. So sometimes we judge what the victim did or didn't do. We play Monday morning quarterback. The truth is that no one knows how they will respond to a traumatic situation, such as sexual assault, until they are faced with it in their own life. Beware of this tendency to judge victims for what you think they did wrong. What matters is that we understand who put them in the situation and caused the trauma in the first place, the offender. In this case, it was Jack.
I want you to really focus on the rapist's behaviors. It's not uncommon to think, why did she, or she should have. But what we need to see is that there would have been no rape if the rapist wasn't present. If he didn't rape this woman, he would have found another to rape. The motivation behind most sexual assaults, from touching to rape, is power and control. A person can take control, humiliate, intimidate, or act out power by raising a fist to someone, or they can sexually assault them. Rape isn't committed because someone can't stop themselves during a sexual encounter or it's a mistake. Offenders intentionally perpetrate. No does not matter to them. From the WGRA, we know that 22% of offenders use some degree of physical force during the sexual assault. 21% threatened to ruin the victim's reputation if he/she did not consent, and 18% threatened to physically harm the victim if they did not consent. This shows intentionality and choices made by the offender. In the Air Force Gallup survey, over half the victims of sexual assault communicated no in some manner, but it was ignored by the offender. Take a look at the people pictured here. They are all Air Force members that have been convicted of a sexual assault. They are MTIs, lawyers, and doctors who use drugs, alcohol, and power to take advantage of their victims. They turned their backs on our Air Force core values and harmed our Air Force family. Sexual assault offenders are an insider threat. They prey on our airmen and our military family. These are a minority group of people in our Air Force, estimated only 5%, and are represented by the figures outlined in red. The members of the second group, highlighted in yellow on this slide, are those who use sexually coercive behaviors. These individuals need to learn the effects of the continuum of sexual violence and abuse of power. They contribute to an environment that allows perpetrators to work among us. We can teach them the consequences of their behaviors and how they affect the issues of sexual assault and their airmen. Most of us belong to the green group. These are our airmen who are not harming others, not involved with sexual violence or any other behaviors that fall into the continuum of harm, such as sexual innuendos, rape joke, inappropriate touching, harassment, etc. This is the group that is the most influence. We can change this issue of sexual assault. We can create and maintain a culture of respect and dignity for all. We can stand up against the others or say something to those who do not maintain an Air Force culture. We can provide victim support for victims and help deter those who do not maintain our standards. The majority of us, with our values and our actions, can create prevention. The right side of the figure, or the light gray area, is what happens when prevention, despite our hardest attempt at it, does not work. This is response, and it is where we assist victims, hold investigations, and stop offenders. After an assault, victims have the option for restricted or unrestricted reporting. Restricted reports can only be filed by the Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, SARC. As a victim, if you report your assault to a chaplain or healthcare provider, your discussion with that individual is entitled to privileged status. However, the chaplain or healthcare personnel will contact the SARC in the event of any report of sexual assault. You will be given the option to file a restricted or unrestricted report. Your restricted report will remain restricted unless you choose to convert it to an unrestricted report. You may also contact a victim advocate if you wish to make a restricted report. The victim advocate will contact the SARC in order to make the restricted report. The SARC will also coordinate unrestricted reporting. You can report a sexual assault to the following individuals and maintain your right to file a restricted report. Regardless of the type of report you decide to file, we will support you and give you assistance. We will assign a victim advocate to your case who will keep your information confidential and will treat you with dignity and respect. Make sure you are safe, provide you with medical treatment, legal support, and counseling. If you choose to file an unrestricted report, we will also coordinate an expedited transfer if you choose, provide for an immediate criminal investigation, notify your commander as well as the offender's commander. Finally, we will continue to support you in any way we can, regardless of the report you choose to make. If you report a sexual assault to anyone other than a SARC, victim advocate, healthcare personnel, or chaplain, that airman supervisor or commander is obligated to report the assault up the chain of command and to appropriate legal authorities. You will lose your option for restricted reporting. I am not saying that to deter you from reporting. I just want you to know that as a fellow airman, there is an obligation to report any sexual assault unless that report is made to the SARC, VA, chaplain, or healthcare personnel. In an unrestricted report, we will provide an immediate response to the assault. Some unrestricted reports will have civilian, judicial, and disposition procedures based on jurisdiction, but SAPR personnel and leaders are here to support victims. It is ultimately everyone's responsibility to support a known victim of sexual assault. It is imperative that when any airman, regardless of rank or position, knows about a victim of sexual assault, that he or she mitigates re-traumatization of the victim by responding immediately to the assault, not spreading rumors, and by not placing judgment. Airmen can support victims by getting them to the SARC or a victim advocate. They should withhold judgment on either party and allow both the victim and alleged offender to be treated with dignity throughout the process. There are three primary objectives of the SAPR program. Objective number one is that perpetrators are deterred and criminal behavior is eliminated by identifying and appropriately holding them accountable as early as possible on the continuum of harm and creating an environment that deters potential offenders, predators. What can we do to meet this objective? As airmen, know what constitutes consent, know what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, know the definition of sexual assault, and be familiar with predatory grooming behavior. Finally, be brave enough to confront inappropriate behavior and be willing to intervene. As leaders and supervisors, we need to communicate clear standards of behavior and consistently hold airmen accountable when they fail to meet standards. Military justice agencies have the responsibility of conducting timely, thorough investigations and utilizing interview techniques designed to empower victims and improve information collection. Objective number 2 is that victims come forward. We want a higher percentage of victims to come forward with unrestricted reports, and we want victims to have increased faith and trust in our chain of command and legal system. To meet Objective 2, airmen need to believe they will be trusted and supported by peers and leadership. Leaders and supervisors must lead by example, be sensitive to victims, and ensure victims are supported and not blamed. Leaders also need to examine their own biases regarding victim blaming. I want to reiterate, victims are to never be blamed for sexual assault. Care agencies have the responsibility to prioritize the health of victims, minimize re-traumatization, and ensure victims are fully informed of roles and responsibilities of military justice agencies. Military justice agencies have a responsibility to understand the psychological impact of assault trauma and minimize victim re-traumatization as much as possible. Objective 3 is to build and reinforce the Air Force climate by making sure airmen know what it means to behave professionally on and off duty and actively support a climate of dignity and respect. And commanders are held accountable when they fail to correct behavior that negatively impacts a climate of dignity and respect. To meet Objective 3, airmen need to understand how to talk and support survivors, hold peers responsible for maintaining a positive and healthy culture, and intervene when we observe misbehavior or grooming. Airmen need to also have more empathy for victims by intervening when you see a situation headed down the road to sexual assault. Leader supervisors must set clear standards, take appropriate action for all inappropriate behaviors, actively establish climates of dignity and respect by example, and maintain professional relationships throughout the chain of command. Support agencies have the responsibility to work with commanders to train and educate airmen on all aspects of sexual assault, including prevention, victim care, and case prosecution. Now that I have given you some numbers and facts, I want to give you my challenge. Understand the issue. Talk openly and honestly. Get involved when you see or hear something. Proactively evaluate our culture and hold each other accountable.